The mortar shell landed 40 meters to the left, sending a shower of red clay and splintered acacia wood across the hillside. Private Elena Vasquez pressed her face deeper into the earth, tasting copper and dust as the ground trembled beneath her chest. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear Sergeant Morrison's voice crackling through the radio static, but the words were lost in the chaos of automatic gunfire echoing off the canyon walls. "Contact left! Contact left!" The shout came from somewhere behind her, followed by the distinctive pop, pop, pop of an AK-47. Elena's fingers found the grip of her M4, but her hands were shaking so violently she couldn't get a proper hold. The weapon felt impossibly heavy, like it was made of lead instead of polymer and steel. She was supposed to be the communications specialist, the one who stayed back and coordinated, but somehow she'd ended up on the front line when the ambush started. Her radio pack, 30 pounds of equipment that usually felt manageable during training, now seemed to pin her to the ground like an anchor. The earpiece had come loose during the initial explosion, dangling by its cord and picking up nothing but white noise. To her right, she could see Private First Class Marcus Chen crawling toward a cluster of rocks, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. Blood seeped through his desert camouflage uniform, dark stains spreading across the tan fabric. His eyes met hers for a moment, wide with shock and pain, and she saw him mouth a single word: help. Behind them, maybe 20 meters back, Staff Sergeant Williams was shouting orders that Elena couldn't quite make out over the din of combat. Williams had been their unit's anchor since basic training, a 15-year veteran who'd done 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. If Williams was concerned, they were all in serious trouble. Elena had never heard that note of urgency in the sergeant's voice before, not even during their most intense training exercises at Fort Braxton. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley floor below. Elena could smell smoke, not just gunpowder, but something else. Wood burning, maybe rubber. The acrid scent mixed with the metallic tang of blood and the earthy smell of disturbed soil. Her mouth was dry as sandpaper, and she realized she'd been breathing through her mouth, panting like a dog in the heat. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. 3 weeks ago, Elena had been sitting in a classroom at the forward operating base, listening to Lieutenant Colonel Hayes explain their mission parameters. It was supposed to be a routine patrol, a show of force through a region that had been quiet for months. Intelligence suggested minimal enemy activity, low risk, good training for the newer recruits. Elena had volunteered for the deployment partly to prove herself, partly to escape the whispers that followed her through the corridors back at base. At 5'3" and barely meeting the minimum weight requirements even after months of intensive training, she'd earned nicknames that stung more than her drill sergeant's worst insults. Mouse, Twig, the Kid. The other soldiers didn't mean to be cruel. Military culture was just naturally hierarchical, and physical presence mattered. But Elena had felt the weight of their doubt every single day. Now, pinned down in hostile territory, with enemy fire coming from 3 directions, those doubts seemed prophetic. Her squad leader, Corporal Janet Torres, had taken shrapnel to the face when the first IED went off. Elena had watched Torres go down, blood streaming from her forehead, and felt something cold and sharp twist in her stomach. Torres was the strongest person Elena had ever known, a woman who could carry a wounded soldier twice her size and still maintain fire discipline under pressure. If Torres was down, what hope did Elena have? The radio in her pack crackled to life suddenly, cutting through the static with startling clarity. Bravo 7, this is Overwatch. We have your position. Enemy contact confirmed. Extract to Rally Point Charlie in 15 mics. How to copy? Another mortar round whistled overhead, closer this time. Elena ducked instinctively, pressing herself against the earth as debris rained down around her position. When she looked up, she could see movement on the ridgeline to the north, muzzle flashes winking like deadly stars in the growing dusk. The enemy had the high ground and seemed to know exactly where the squad was positioned. That was when Elena noticed something that made her blood run cold. The firing pattern wasn't random. It was methodical, coordinated. Someone was directing the ambush with military precision, probably through hand signals or short-range radio communications. This wasn't some opportunistic attack by local insurgents. This was planned. She keyed the radio again, her heart hammering against her ribs. Overwatch, be advised, enemy forces appeared to be... The transmission cut off as another explosion, much closer this time, sent her tumbling sideways into a shallow depression in the ground. When the world stopped spinning, Elena found herself face to face with Private Second Class Amy Rodriguez, the squad's medic. Rodriguez was unconscious, a thin line of blood trickling from her nose. Her medical kit lay scattered around her, bandages and morphine syringes mixed with loose dirt and shell fragments. Elena pressed 2 fingers against Rodriguez's throat, feeling for a pulse. It was there, steady but weak. The reality of their situation hit Elena like a physical blow. Torres was down. Rodriguez was unconscious. Chen was wounded and possibly in shock. Williams was still calling out orders, but Elena could hear the strain in his voice, the edge of desperation. Their squad of 8 had been reduced to maybe 4 effective fighters, and they were surrounded in unfamiliar territory with night falling fast. Elena's training told her to establish a defensive perimeter, call for close air support, and wait for extraction. But her instincts she'd never trusted before, told her something different. They couldn't stay here. The enemy knew their position too well, had too much cover and concealment. Every minute they remained stationary made them more vulnerable to indirect fire and flanking maneuvers. She crawled toward Chen's position, keeping low as rounds snapped overhead. The rocks he'd taken cover behind were actually part of an old stone wall, probably from a shepherd's hut or a grain storage building. The structure mostly collapsed, but it provided some protection from the direct fire coming from the north ridge. "Chen," she hissed, staying below the wall line. "Chen, can you move?" He turned toward her, his face pale and streaked with sweat. "My shoulder's fucked, Vasquez. I can't feel my fingers." He held up his right hand, and Elena could see it trembling uncontrollably. "But I can still shoot left-handed if you need me to." That was Chen, always ready to fight, even when he was barely holding it together. Elena had trained with him for 6 months, and she'd never seen him back down from anything. He was from San Antonio, had grown up in neighborhoods where backing down could get you killed. The army had given him structure and purpose, and he'd embraced military life with an intensity that sometimes worried Elena. Now, looking at his injured arm and the pain etched across his features, she felt a surge of protective anger that surprised her. "Stay here," she told him. "Cover Rodriguez. I'm going to check on the others." Elena low crawled back toward Williams' position, moving in the zigzag pattern they'd drilled countless times during tactical training. The sergeant was crouched behind the remains of what looked like an old vehicle chassis, rust-red metal that had been picked clean by years of scavengers. He was speaking rapidly into his radio, coordinating with the other fire teams. "Vasquez?" Williams spotted her approach. "Where's the fucking radio? We need comms with the TOC." Elena slid the radio pack off her shoulders, her back aching from the weight. "Here, Sergeant, but I think the main antenna got damaged in the initial blast." She showed him the bent whip antenna, its tip missing and the coaxial cable partially severed. Williams cursed under his breath, examining the damage. "Can you fix it?"
Maybe. Give me 5 minutes. Elena had always been good with electronics and had planned to study electrical engineering before the Army recruiter found her working at a Radio Shack in Tucson. Her small hands were actually an advantage when working with delicate components, though she'd never mentioned that to anyone. While she worked on the radio, Elena listened to Williams coordinating their defensive efforts. The squad was spread across roughly 50 meters of broken ground, using whatever cover they could find. The enemy fire was coming from at least 3 positions, suggesting a coordinated force of maybe 12 to 15 fighters. Professional, disciplined, not the kind of opponents you wanted to face when your own unit was compromised and isolated. Elena stripped the damaged section of coaxial cable and twisted the bare copper wires together, her fingers surprisingly steady despite everything happening around her. She'd done this repair dozens of times during training, but never under fire. The familiar routine helped calm her nerves, gave her something concrete to focus on. As she worked, she found herself thinking about her grandmother's hands. Elena had spent summers in Nogales with her abuela, watching those weathered fingers work magic with needle and thread. repairing clothes that should have been thrown away years earlier. Mija, her grandmother used to say, God gives us problems so we can learn to solve them, but first we have to believe we can. The radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the Tactical Operations Center as Elena and her squad prepared for their final descent to the extraction site. Bravo 7, be advised we have multiple enemy vehicles moving toward your extraction point. Estimate 12 to 15 personnel in 4 vehicles, ETA 10 minutes to your location. Elena held her stomach drop as she processed this intelligence. Their carefully planned approach was about to be compromised by enemy forces that had apparently figured out their true location and destination. All of her tactical analysis and route planning would be meaningless if enemy forces reached the LZ before the extraction helicopter arrived. Williams was already calculating response options, his mind working through the tactical mathematics of time, distance, and firepower. How long until our bird gets here? Elena checked her communications with the extraction helicopter, confirming their estimated arrival time. 15 minutes for the aircraft, but they'll need at least 5 minutes on the ground to load personnel and conduct pre-flight checks. The timeline was impossibly tight. Enemy forces would reach the extraction site before the helicopter arrived, and they'd have time to establish defensive positions that could prevent a successful extraction. Williams was facing a tactical decision that had no good options: attempt to reach the LZ first and defend it against superior forces, or find an alternate extraction site and hope that higher command could redirect air assets to a new location. Elena was studying her map and thinking through alternatives when she noticed something that changed her understanding of their situation. The enemy vehicles were approaching from the southwest, following a road network that would bring them to the extraction site along a predictable route. But Elena's analysis of the terrain suggested that there were several positions along that route where a small force could significantly delay or even stop the enemy advance. "Sergeant," Elena said, pointing to a narrow bridge that crossed a steep-sided wadi about 2 kilometers from the extraction site. "If we can get someone to that bridge before the enemy vehicles arrive, we might be able to stop them, or at least slow them down enough for our extraction to succeed." Williams studied the terrain feature Elena had identified. The bridge was a concrete structure, maybe 50 meters long, crossing a wadi that was too steep for vehicles to traverse at any other point. A small force with explosives or accurate rifle fire could potentially disable vehicles attempting to cross, creating a bottleneck that would delay the entire enemy force. "That's a one-way mission," Williams pointed out. "Whoever goes to that bridge won't make it back to the LZ in time for extraction." Elena had already considered that possibility, and she'd reached a conclusion that surprised her with its clarity. "I'll go. I can carry explosives from Rodriguez's kit, and I've got the radio to coordinate with the extraction helicopter. If I can stop those vehicles, the rest of you can extract safely." Williams stared at Elena with an expression of disbelief. "Mouse, that's not how this works. I'm not sending the smallest member of this squad on a solo mission against superior forces." "With respect, Sergeant, it's not about size." Elena's voice was steady, confident in a way that surprised even her. "It's about who has the best chance of completing the mission. I know explosives from my communications training. I can move faster than anyone else in the squad, and I can coordinate the timing with air assets better than anyone else." Torres spoke up from her position, blood still seeping from her shrapnel wounds. "Elena's right. She's been making the tactical calls that got us this far. If she thinks she can stop those vehicles, we should let her try." Rodriguez nodded agreement, despite the concussion that was still affecting her balance and coordination. "I can give her enough explosives to take out that bridge. Demo charges from my kit plus some improvised devices from our grenades. It should be enough to stop vehicles, or at least damage the structural bridge." Chen was testing his injured shoulder, evaluating his own capabilities for the proposed mission. "I could go with her, provide security while she sets the charges." Elena shook her head. "Your shoulder limits your mobility too much. This needs to be fast. Get in, set the charges, get out before the vehicles arrive. I can do it alone better than we can do it together." Williams was clearly struggling with the decision. Military doctrine emphasized keeping units together and avoiding unnecessary risks to personnel. But their situation had moved beyond standard doctrine into tactical improvisation based on immediate circumstances and available capabilities. Elena could see the calculation in William's eyes as he weighed the risks of her proposed mission against the alternative of trying to defend the extraction site against superior forces. Finally, he made the decision that Elena had known he would make, the decision that prioritized mission success and the survival of the maximum number of personnel. "All right, Vasquez. You've got 15 minutes to get to that bridge and set your charges, but I want continuous radio contact, and if the situation goes sideways, you abort and try to reach an alternate extraction point." Elena was already stripping unnecessary equipment from her pack, keeping only her radio, ammunition, and the explosives that Rodriguez was preparing for her. The demo charges were military-grade plastic explosives with timed detonators, supplemented by several fragmentation grenades that could be rigged for remote activation. Rodriguez gave Elena a quick briefing on the explosives, explaining the optimal placement for maximum structural damage and the timing procedures for coordinated detonation. Despite her concussion, Rodriguez was lucid and professional, passing along technical knowledge that could make the difference between mission success and mission failure. "Place the main charges at the support points," Rodriguez instructed, pointing the structural diagram she'd sketched on her map. "Use the grenades as secondary devices to damage vehicles that might try to cross damaged sections. And remember, these charges have a minimum safe distance of 200 meters. Don't get caught close when they detonate." Elena memorized the procedures and timing requirements, adding them to her mental checklist of mission-critical tasks. She felt calmer than she had expected, focused on the technical aspects of her mission rather than the obvious dangers. It was similar to the feeling she had experienced during electronics training, the satisfaction of solving complex problems with precise technical solutions. Williams gave Elena final tactical guidance for her solo mission. "Move fast, stay low, and don't engage unless you have to. Your job is to stop those vehicles, not to fight a pitched battle against superior forces. Set your charges, detonate them when the vehicles are in the kill zone, and then get the hell out of there." Elena nodded and prepared to move out, but Torres stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. "Elena," Torres said, using her actual name instead of the nickname that
Throughout her military career, you've been carrying this squad all night, not because you're strong in the way people usually think about strength, but because you're smart and careful, and you don't give up. That's why this mission is going to work." Elena felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back and focused on the mission ahead. For the first time in her military career, she felt completely confident in her abilities and completely clear about her purpose. She wasn't the weak link anymore. She was the person best qualified to complete the most critical mission of the evening. The movement to the bridge required all of Elena's navigation skills and tactical awareness. She moved quickly but carefully, using terrain features to mask her approach, and maintaining radio contact with both her squad and higher command. The explosives felt heavy in her pack, but they also felt purposeful, tools that would allow her to protect her squad mates and complete their mission successfully. As Elena reached the bridge, she could hear the sound of approaching vehicles in the distance, diesel engines and tire noise that suggested the enemy force was maybe 5 minutes away from her position. She had time to set her charges and reach minimum safe distance, but not much time for contingencies or complications. Elena moved with practiced efficiency, placing the main explosive charges at the structural points Rodriguez had identified and rigging the supplementary grenades for remote detonation. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, and her technical training guided her through procedures she'd practiced dozens of times, but never used in actual combat. The sound of vehicles was getting closer as Elena completed her preparations and moved to her detonation position. Through her night vision equipment, she could see headlights approaching the bridge, 4 vehicles carrying what looked like a full squad of enemy fighters. They were moving with tactical discipline, using proper spacing and security procedures that suggested professional military training. Elena keyed her radio and reported to Williams. "Charges set. Enemy vehicles approaching. Prepare for detonation in 30 seconds." Williams' voice came back steady and professional. "Copy. Charges set. The extraction helicopter is 3 minutes out. Execute when ready."
Elena watched the lead vehicle approach the bridge, timing her detonation for maximum tactical effect. She wanted to catch as many vehicles as possible in the kill zone while ensuring that the bridge structure would be damaged enough to prevent vehicular crossing. It was a complex calculation involving timing, distance, and explosive effects. Exactly the kind of technical problem Elena had always been good at solving. When the lead vehicle reached the center of the bridge, Elena triggered the detonation. The explosion was far more powerful than Elena had expected, sending a column of fire and debris into the night sky and illuminating the surrounding terrain with brilliant orange light. The bridge structure collapsed completely, taking the lead vehicle with it and blocking the road for any follow-on traffic. The secondary explosions from her improvised grenades caught 2 additional vehicles, disabling them and creating a barrier of burning wreckage. Elena was already moving toward her extraction point when she heard the sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. The extraction bird was arriving on schedule, and her mission had succeeded in stopping the enemy vehicles that would have compromised the operation. She felt a surge of professional satisfaction as she realized that her tactical planning and technical execution had been flawless. But Elena's sense of accomplishment was tempered by the realization that her own extraction was far from certain. She was now 2 kilometers from the LZ, with enemy forces between her position and her squad mates. The explosion had announced her location to every hostile force in the area, and she could already hear vehicles and personnel moving to investigate the destruction of the bridge. Elena began moving toward the extraction site, using her remaining technical equipment to monitor both friendly and enemy communications. She could hear Williams coordinating with the extraction helicopter, confirming that the squad was ready for pickup. She could also hear enemy forces coordinating search efforts to locate whoever had destroyed their vehicles. The race to reach the LZ before extraction was completed would test every skill Elena had developed throughout the evening. Navigation under pressure, tactical movement through hostile territory, and the kind of physical endurance that her small frame had never been expected to provide. As Elena moved through the darkness toward her squad mates in safety, she realized that she'd found something during this mission that had been missing throughout her military career: absolute confidence in her own capabilities and complete clarity about her value as a soldier. She wasn't trying to be someone else anymore. She was exactly who her squad needed her to be. Elena had never planned to be a soldier. 3 years earlier, she'd been working the evening shift at a Radio Shack in Tucson, helping customers with their flip phones and selling batteries to retirees who still used portable radios. Her life had a predictable rhythm: work until 9, drive her beat-up Honda Civic home to the apartment she shared with 2 roommates, microwave dinner, and fall asleep watching late-night television. She was saving money for community college, hoping to study electronics or maybe computer repair. Something stable, something that didn't require her to be anything other than competent with her hands. The Army recruiter had found her during her lunch break, sitting in the parking lot behind the strip mall where she worked. Staff Sergeant Patricia Vance was everything Elena wasn't: tall, confident, with perfect posture and a handshake that could crack walnuts. She'd been making her rounds through local businesses, looking for prospects, and something about Elena, maybe her small frame, maybe the electronics textbook she was reading, caught her attention. "You know," Vance had said, settling uninvited into the passenger seat of Elena's car, "the Army's always looking for people who understand technology. Communication specialists start at a higher pay grade, get better training, see more of the world." Elena had been polite but uninterested. The military seemed designed for people like her high school classmates who'd played football and talked about honor and brotherhood, not for quiet girls who preferred soldering circuits to social interactions. But Vance was persistent, and Elena's financial situation was getting desperate. Community college kept getting more expensive, and her hours at Radio Shack were being cut as the chain struggled against big-box competitors. The turning point came 6 weeks later when Elena's mother called with news that changed everything. Her father, a construction worker who'd been dealing with back problems for years, had been diagnosed with a herniated disc that required surgery.
The family's insurance would cover most of the procedure, but not the extended physical therapy he'd need afterward. Elena's savings account, already meager, wouldn't make much difference. That's when she remembered Staff Sergeant Vance's business card still tucked into her wallet behind a picture of her high school graduation. Military service could provide steady income, health benefits for her family, and the GI Bill for college afterward. It seemed like a solution, even if it wasn't the solution Elena would have chosen for herself. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood had been everything Elena expected and worse. The physical demands were manageable, she'd always been stronger than she looked, but the psychological pressure was overwhelming. Drill Sergeant Morrison, the same Morrison whose voice she could hear now crackling through the radio, had taken particular interest in breaking down Elena's quiet self-reliance. He had called her Mouse from the first day, and the nickname had stuck like superglue. "Mouse, you planted a whisper at the enemy until they surrender?" Morrison would shout during weapons training, his face inches from Elena's ear. "Sound off like you got a pair." Elena had learned to shout on command, to march in formation, to field strip her weapon in darkness, but she'd never learned to project the kind of aggressive confidence that military culture rewarded. Even after graduating from advanced individual training as a communications specialist, finishing second in her class, Elena felt like she was playing a role that didn't quite fit. Her first duty assignment was Fort Braxton, North Carolina, a mid-sized installation that served as home base for several support units. Elena had hoped for something technical, maybe working in a communications center or maintaining radio equipment. Instead, she had been assigned to an infantry support role with Bravo Company, spending most of her time in the field
carrying a radio pack and trying to keep up with soldiers who treated patrol movements like athletic competitions. The physical demands weren't impossible, but they were constant. Elena could carry her assigned equipment, but she had to work twice as hard as everyone else to maintain the same pace. During ruck marches, she'd watch her squad mates joking and talking while she focused entirely on putting one foot in front of the other. During tactical exercises, she'd struggle with the weight of her gear while trying to maintain radio communications with multiple units simultaneously. What made it worse were the small kindnesses that felt like pity. Corporal Torres would offer to carry Elena's water bottles during long movements. Specialist Davidson would suggest she stay back at the command post during the more physically demanding portions of training exercises. Everyone was trying to be helpful, but Elena could see the calculation behind their generosity. She was the weak link, the one who needed protection. Elena's personal life at Fort Braxton had been equally challenging in different ways. She'd tried dating a few times, meeting men through the base social activities and off-duty gatherings, but military relationships seemed to follow patterns she couldn't quite navigate. The men she met either wanted to take care of her, treating her like a little sister who needed protection, or they were put off by her independence and technical competence. Either way, Elena found herself spending most of her free time alone, reading technical manuals or working on electronics projects in her barracks room. Her family had been proud when she completed basic training, and Elena sent home photos of herself in dress uniform, looking professional and confident. But the reality was more complicated. She'd learned to function within military structure, had developed genuine friendships with some of her fellow soldiers, and had discovered reserves of physical and mental toughness she'd never known she possessed. At the same time, she still felt like an outsider, someone who'd learned to speak the language without fully understanding the culture. The deployment to Afghanistan had been both an opportunity and a source of anxiety. Elena had volunteered partly to prove herself, partly to earn the overseas pay that would help her family's financial situation. She'd spent months preparing, studying maps and cultural briefings, practicing her radio procedures until they were second nature. She'd even put in extra time at the base gym, trying to build the kind of physical presence that might earn her more respect from her peers. But now, crouched in hostile territory with enemy fire snapping overhead, all of Elena's preparation felt inadequate. The radio procedures she'd memorized seemed useless when the enemy was coordinating their movements with whistles and hand signals. The physical fitness she'd worked so hard to develop wasn't enough to make her an effective combat soldier. Even her technical skills, the foundation of her military identity, felt irrelevant in the situation that demanded split-second tactical decisions. Elena's mind kept returning to a conversation she'd had with her grandmother just before deploying. They'd been sitting on the back porch of the house in Nogales, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Elena had been trying to explain why she'd joined the army, why she was going to Afghanistan, what she hoped to accomplish. Mija, her grandmother had said, using the affectionate diminutive that Elena had loved since childhood. Strength isn't about how much you can carry. It's about carrying what needs to be carried when it needs to be carried. At the time, Elena thought her grandmother was just being supportive, offering the kind of generic wisdom that older people shared with younger relatives facing uncertain futures. But now, with Rodriguez's medical kit weighing down her shoulders and Chen's blood staining the ground behind their defensive positions, those words seemed to contain a different kind of truth. Elena had always measured herself against external standards, the Army's physical fitness requirements, her peers' expectations, the stereotype of what a soldier should look like and act like. She'd spent 3 years trying to become stronger in ways that would make her less different, less vulnerable to the casual dismissal that came with being called mouse. But the situation they were facing didn't care about any of that. The enemy mortars falling around their position weren't making distinctions based on who looked most like a soldier. The 5 miles of hostile territory between their current location and the extraction point wouldn't be easier to traverse for someone with broader shoulders or a deeper voice. Right now, their survival depended on different kinds of strength, the ability to maintain communications under pressure, to navigate by map and compass in unfamiliar terrain, to make tactical decisions when traditional hierarchy was compromised by casualties and chaos. Elena looked around at her wounded squad mates and felt something shift inside her chest, like a lock clicking open. Rodriguez was fighting a concussion that made her dizzy and nauseous. Chen's injured shoulder had robbed him of his dominant hand and probably 20% of his combat effectiveness. Torres was trying to function with shrapnel wounds that should have required immediate medical attention. Williams was making command decisions based on doctrine and training that might not apply to their current tactical situation. For the first time in her military career, Elena's size and technical background weren't disadvantages to overcome. They were tools she could use. Her small frame would be an advantage during movement through broken terrain. Her electronics knowledge gave her a better understanding of how their communications equipment actually worked, not just how to operate it according to manual procedures. Her careful, methodical approach to problem-solving, the same personality trait that made her seem hesitant during aggressive combat exercises, might be exactly what they needed for a complex infiltration movement. Elena adjusted the radio pack on her shoulders, redistributing the weight more efficiently across her frame. The equipment was still heavy, but it felt purposeful now rather than burdensome. She was the squad's link to higher command, their navigation specialist, and potentially their best hope for identifying safe routes through enemy territory. Those responsibilities were daunting, but they were also clarifying. Williams was still coordinating their movement plan, giving instructions to the various fire team leaders about intervals and security procedures. Elena listened to the familiar military terminology, bounds, sectors of fire, rally points, and realized that she understood not just the words, but the underlying tactical logic. 3 years of training and exercises had built an intuitive understanding of small unit movement that she'd never fully appreciated. More importantly, Elena was beginning to see patterns in their current situation that others might be missing. Williams was focused on speed and direct routes, trying to minimize their exposure time in hostile territory. But Elena's technical background made her think differently about risk assessment. Sometimes, the fastest solution created cascading problems that took much longer to solve.
Sometimes, the careful, methodical approach to problem-solving, the same personality trait that made her seem hesitant during aggressive combat exercises, might be exactly what they needed for a complex infiltration movement. The radio crackled with another transmission from the Tactical Operations Center requesting updates on their position and estimated time of arrival at the extraction point. Elena keyed the handset and responded with their current grid coordinates and a realistic assessment of their movement timeline. As she spoke, she found herself thinking not just about what higher command wanted to hear, but about what information they actually needed to make informed decisions about resource allocation and tactical support. Overwatch, be advised we have confirmed enemy observation of the primary route to extraction. Request permission to utilize an alternate approach through the valley complex to the west. There was a pause, followed by Williams' sharp look in Elena's direction. She'd just contradicted his tactical plan over the radio, in front of higher command. Under normal circumstances, that would be grounds for serious disciplinary action. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Elena was beginning to understand that normal military hierarchy might not be the most effective approach to their current problem. "Bravo 7, explain alternate route," came the response from Overwatch. Elena spread her map on the ground again, this time more confident in her analysis. Alternate route adds approximately 2 kilometers distance but provides significantly better concealment and multiple egress options if we encounter enemy contact. Valley approach also gives us a high ground advantage for the final approach to LZ. She could feel Williams' eyes on her, but she didn't look up from the map. Elena was remembering something from her advanced communications training, a class on battlefield decision-making that seemed academic at the time. The instructor, a major who'd done multiple combat tours, had emphasized that effective communication wasn't just about relaying information. It was about providing context that enabled better decisions at every level of command.
Stand by, Bravo 7. The pause stretched out longer this time, and Elena could imagine the discussion taking place in the TOC. Officers checking terrain analysis, consulting with intelligence specialists, weighing the tactical advantages of speed versus stealth. When the radio finally crackled back to life, the response surprised everyone. "Bravo 7, you are cleared to utilize alternate routes at squad leader's discretion. Be advised, the weather update indicates potential visibility issues in 2 hours. Recommend expedited movement regardless of route selection." Williams was staring at Elena with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger exactly, but it wasn't approval either. "You want to explain to me why you just countermanded my tactical decision in front of higher command?" Elena felt her cheeks burn, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "Sergeant, I wasn't trying to countermand anything. I was providing information that might affect our mission's success." She pointed to her map, indicating the terrain features she'd identified. "The primary route exposes us to observation from at least 3 different high-ground positions. If the enemy has coordinated their ambush properly, they're probably already moving to cut off that approach." "And you know how, Mouse? You got some kind of tactical experience I don't know about?" The nickname stung, but Elena pushed through it. "No, Sergeant, but I know electronics, and I know how radio networks function. The signals we heard earlier, the whistles, that was coordination between distributed elements. If I was planning an ambush, I'd position observers along the most obvious escape routes and use mobile elements to respond to enemy movement." Williams studied the map for a long moment, his finger tracing the route Elena had suggested. She could see him working through the tactical problem, evaluating risks and advantages. Finally, he looked up at her with something that might have been respect. "All right, Vasquez, we'll try your valley route. But if this gets us more contact instead of less, it's on you." He folded the map and handed it back to her. "You're our navigator now. Don't fuck it up." Elena took the map, feeling the weight of responsibilities settle across her shoulders alongside her radio pack. For the first time in her military career, someone was trusting her technical judgment over conventional tactical doctrine. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. As the squad prepared to move out, Elena ran through her mental checklist one more time. Radio frequencies confirmed. Navigation route memorized. Emergency procedures reviewed. She was as ready as training and preparation could make her, but she knew that the next 5 miles would test capabilities she'd never fully explored. Rodriguez appeared at her elbow, moving slowly but steadily. "Hey, Mouse," she said, using the nickname without any apparent awareness of how it usually affected Elena. "That route you suggested, you really think it's safer?" Elena looked at the medic's concussed eyes and bandaged head wounds, thought about Chen's injured shoulder and Torres's shrapnel damage. These people were trusting her judgment with their lives. The responsibility was overwhelming, but it was also clarifying. "I think it gives us the best chance," Elena said simply. "Sometimes the long way around is the short way home." Rodriguez nodded and moved to check on Chen's condition. Elena adjusted her radio pack one final time, tested her grip on a rifle, and tried to project the kind of confidence that would reassure her wounded squad mates. Inside, her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her hands were steady and her mind was clear. The night was going to test every assumption she'd ever made about herself, but for the first time in her military career, Elena felt like she was exactly where she needed to be, carrying exactly what needed to be carried. The first kilometer was deceptively easy. Elena led the squad down into the valley through a narrow game trail, then wound between weathered limestone outcroppings, their boots finding purchase on loose shale that shifted and scattered with each step. The terrain provided natural concealment, with scattered juniper trees and thorn bushes breaking of their silhouettes against the hillside. Behind them, the sound of sporadic gunfire continued at their original position, suggesting that some enemy forces were still engaged with what they thought was the American squad. Elena moved with careful precision, stopping every 50 meters to consult her compass and check their progress against her map. The radio pack bounced against her lower back with each step, and she developed a rhythm of adjusting the straps to prevent chafing. Her M4 rifle, once awkwardly heavy in her small hands, now felt like a natural extension of her arms. More importantly, Elena was beginning to trust her instincts about terrain and movement, reading the landscape in ways her classroom training had never taught her. Rodriguez was managing her concussion better than Elena had expected, moving steadily and maintaining good spacing behind Chen, who was struggling more with his shoulder injury than he wanted to admit. Williams brought up the rear of their small formation, his eyes constantly scanning their back trail for signs of pursuit. Torres had taken point initially, but her shrapnel wounds were affecting her depth perception, and Elena had gently suggested that she might be more effective coordinating their movement from the middle of the formation. The valley floor was roughly 300 meters wide, with a dry creek bed running down the center that showed evidence of recent water flow. Elena could see tire tracks in the hard-panned soil, probably from local herders moving livestock, but nothing that suggested recent military activity. The air was still and cool, carrying scents of sage and dust that reminded Elena of camping trips she'd taken with her family in the mountains outside Tucson. That false sense of security evaporated when they reached the first major terrain feature on Elena's planned route, a narrow defile where the valley walls closed to within 50 meters of each other. On her map, it had looked like a convenient choke point that would provide concealment during their approach to the higher ground on the far side. In reality, it looked like a perfect place for an ambush. Elena called a halt and moved up to examine the defile more carefully. The rocky walls rose steeply on both sides, offering multiple positions where enemy observers could remain concealed while maintaining clear fields of fire on anyone moving through the narrow passage. More concerning, Elena could see evidence of recent human activity: cigarette butts, a discarded plastic water bottle, and what looked like a fighting position that had been camouflaged with local vegetation. She signaled Williams forward and pointed out what she'd observed. The sergeant studied the evidence with practiced eyes, his expression growing more serious by the moment. "Shit," Williams muttered under his breath. Looks like your alternate route isn't as clear as we hoped. He crouched next to Elena, studying the terrain through his rifle scope. The question is whether this is an active position or something left over from previous operations. Elena was already thinking through alternatives. The valley continued for another 2 kilometers before reaching the high ground that would give them overwatch of the extraction site. But there were at least 3 more similar choke points along the route. If enemy forces had positioned themselves strategically, the squad could find themselves trapped between prepared positions with no good options for escape or maneuver. "Sergeant," Elena said quietly, "what if we go up and over instead of through?" Williams followed her gaze to the eastern wall of the valley, where a series of natural ledges and erosion channels created what might be a climbable route to the ridgeline above. It would be physically demanding, especially for their wounded personnel, but it would allow them to bypass the potential ambush sites entirely. "Rodriguez can barely walk straight," Williams pointed out. "Chen's got one good arm. You want to ask them to free climb 50 meters of rock face?" Elena studied the cliff more carefully, noting handholds and rest points that might make the ascent manageable even for injured climbers. Her grandmother had taken her rock climbing in Sabino Canyon when she was younger, teaching her to read stone formations and find secure hand and foothold routes up seemingly impossible faces. The skills she'd learned during those weekend adventures might be relevant now in ways she'd never anticipated. "It's not a free climb," Elena said, pointing out the feature she'd identified. "More like a steep hike with some scrambling. And look," she indicated a series of shallow caves about halfway up the face, "natural rest points where we can regroup and treat injuries if needed." Williams was quiet for a long moment, weighing their options. The direct route for the valley was faster, but potentially compromised. The climbing route was safer, but would test their injured personnel beyond reasonable limits. Both choices carried significant risks, and the wrong decision could get them all killed. That's when they heard the sound that made the decision for them. Voices, speaking Arabic, coming from somewhere deeper in the defile. Elena couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clearly conversational, relaxed. People who were comfortable in their environment, not expecting trouble. Williams made hand signals for the squad to take cover and remain silent. Elena found herself pressed against the large boulder, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure the enemy could hear it echoing off the valley walls. Through a gap in the rocks, she could see movement in the shadows of the defile, at least 3 figures moving with the casual alertness of experienced fighters. The enemy patrol was maybe 200 meters away, well within range of accurate rifle fire, but engaging them would reveal the squad's position and likely bring additional forces down on their location. Elena watched Williams calculate the tactical situation, his fingers moving unconsciously as he counted enemy personnel and evaluated firing positions. One of the enemy fighters moved into better light, and Elena could see that he was carrying a radio similar to her own. That confirmed her earlier assessment about coordinated enemy communications. These weren't random insurgents. They were part of an organized force with command and control capabilities. Worse, they were positioned exactly where Elena's planned route would have taken the American squad. Elena felt a cold realization wash over her. Her alternate route hadn't been as clever as she had thought. The enemy had anticipated that American forces would try to avoid the obvious escape routes, and they'd positioned themselves accordingly. The valley approach that had seemed so tactically sound was actually another layer of the trap. Williams signaled for the squad to withdraw quietly, backing away from the defile until they were out of visual range of the enemy patrol. Once they'd reached relative safety, he gathered everyone in a tight circle for a whispered conference. "Change of plans," Williams said quietly. "The valley's compromised. We're going up." He pointed to the cliff face Elena had identified earlier. "It's going to be hard, but it's better than walking into an ambush." Chen looked at the steep rock with obvious concern. "Sergeant, I don't know if I can climb that with my shoulder fucked up." "You'll climb it because the alternative is staying here and getting dead," Williams replied bluntly. "Rodriguez, how's your head?" The medic tested her balance, swaying slightly but managing to stay upright. "Might need help with some of the harder sections, but I can do it."
Elena found herself studying each member of their small group, evaluating their physical capabilities, and thinking through the logistics of moving injured personnel up a challenging rock face. Rodriguez's concussion was affecting her coordination, but her upper body strength was still intact. Chen's injured shoulder would limit his climbing ability, but his legs were unaffected. Torres was probably in the worst shape, with shrapnel wounds that had weakened her significantly, but she was also the most experienced climber among them. "I'll lead," Elena said, surprising herself with her confident tone. "I've done climbing like this before. I can find the route and set up belay points for the others." Williams looked at her skeptically. "Mouse, this isn't a weekend hiking trip. We're talking about moving under potential enemy observation, at night, with wounded personnel." "I know that, Sergeant, but I also know that route." Elena pointed to specific features on the cliff face. "My grandmother used to take me climbing in Arizona. Different rock, but same principles. I can get us up there safely."
Torres spoke up from her position against a large rock. "Let her do it, Sergeant. Elena knows what she's talking about, and frankly, we don't have a lot of other options." Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward Torres, who'd been supporting her decisions throughout the evening despite her own injuries. It was the first time anyone had used Elena's actual name instead of Mouse during a tactical discussion, and the simple recognition felt like a validation of her growing confidence. Williams was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with the decision to place their lives in the hands of someone he'd never seen as a tactical leader. But the sound of voices from the defile reminded them all that time was running out. "All right, Vasquez, your show. But I want security on that climb. Davidson and Kumar will provide overwatch while we're moving up, and if this goes sideways, we're all fucked together." Elena nodded and began removing equipment from her pack, redistributing weight to make the climb more manageable. She kept her radio and essential navigation gear, but transferred ammunition and water to other squad members who would have easier climbs. Torres, despite her injuries, volunteered to carry Elena's extra equipment, insisting that her climbing experience made her the logical choice. The approach to the cliff base required careful movement through scattered boulders and thorny vegetation that caught at their uniforms and equipment. Elena led the way, testing each foothold and marking the safest route for the others to follow. Behind her, she could hear the quiet sounds of her squad mates moving through the darkness, the soft scrape of boots on stone, the muffled clink of metal equipment, the controlled breathing of people pushing through pain and exhaustion. At the base of the cliff, Elena took several minutes to study the rock face in detail, identifying the route that would be most manageable for their wounded personnel. The limestone was solid, with good handholds and friction surfaces, but it was also sharp enough to cut exposed skin. She demonstrated the first few moves to Williams, showing him how to distribute his weight and use his legs rather than his arms for the more challenging sections. "Remember," Elena whispered, "climbing is more about balance and technique than upper body strength. Keep your weight over your feet, use your legs to push up, and don't rush. Better to move slowly and safely than fast and sloppy." The first 50 feet of the climb went smoothly. Elena established a steady pace, pausing frequently to check on the others and point out handholds that might not be obvious in the limited light. Rodriguez was struggling more than Elena had hoped, her concussion affecting her spatial awareness, but Torres was staying close to provide guidance and encouragement. Chen was managing better than expected, using his uninjured arm for balance while relying primarily on his legs for upward movement. Williams climbed with methodical precision, treating each move like a tactical problem to be solved. Davidson and Kumar maintained security at the base of the cliff, their weapons trained on the approaches that might bring enemy forces to their location. The real challenge came at the halfway point, where Elena's planned route required traversing a horizontal ledge that was only 8 inches wide. In daylight, with proper climbing equipment, it would have been a manageable obstacle. In darkness,
With wounded personnel carrying full combat loads, it looked nearly impossible. Elena tested the ledge carefully, making sure it would support their weight. The rock was solid, but the handholds above the traverse were small and widely spaced. Anyone who lost their balance would fall 40 feet to the rocky ground below. "I'll go first and set up a safety line," Elena told Williams. "Rodriguez should go next while she's still fresh, then Chen, then Torres. You bring up the rear in case anyone needs help." Elena began the traverse, moving with careful precision along the narrow ledge. Halfway across, she found a solid anchor point where she could secure a climbing rope from her pack. Standard equipment for communications personnel who might need to establish radio relays in elevated positions. The rope wouldn't prevent a fall entirely, but it would provide some security for the others.
Rodriguez started across next, moving slowly but steadily. Elena could see the strain in her face, the way she fought against dizziness and spatial disorientation. Halfway through the traverse, Rodriguez suddenly stopped, pressing herself against the rock face. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't see where I'm going. Everything's spinning." Elena was already moving, traversing back along the ledge to reach Rodriguez's position. "It's okay," she said quietly. "Close your eyes and feel with your hands. I'll guide you." What followed was the most terrifying 10 minutes of Elena's life. Moving inch by inch, she guided Rodriguez across the remaining distance of the traverse, using voice commands and physical contact to help the injured medic maintain her balance and orientation. When they finally reached the safety of the wider ledge on the far side, both women were shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. Chen made the traverse without major difficulty, his injured shoulder limiting his options but not preventing forward movement. Torres struggled more, her shrapnel wounds affecting her strength and endurance, but she completed the crossing with characteristic determination. Williams was the last to cross, and Elena could see that he was beginning to trust her judgment about the route. When he reached the far side of the traverse, he gave her a nod that contained more respect than any verbal praise. "Good call on the rope," he said quietly. "How much farther to the top?" Elena consulted her map and studied the remaining cliff face. "Maybe 30 feet, but it gets easier from here, more like a steep hike than actual climbing." The final section of the ascent was indeed less technical, but it was also more exposed to potential enemy observation from the valley floor. Elena led the way carefully, testing each handhold and foothold before committing her weight. Behind her, she could hear the controlled breathing of her squadmates as they pushed through exhaustion, pain, and fear. When Elena finally reached the ridgeline, she felt a surge of relief that was immediately tempered by tactical awareness. They were now on high ground, with good observation of the surrounding terrain, but they were also more visible to enemy forces that might be operating in the area. She signaled for the others to remain below the military crest of the ridge while she conducted a quick reconnaissance of their new position. The view from the ridgeline was both encouraging and concerning. Elena could see the extraction point, approximately 3 kilometers to the southeast, marked by the distinctive terrain features she'd memorized from her map study. The route between their current position and the LZ appeared to offer good concealment and multiple approach options. But Elena could also see signs of enemy activity that hadn't been visible from the valley floor. Vehicle tracks, probably from motorcycles or small trucks, crisscrossed the area between their position and the extraction site. More concerning, she could see what looked like prepared fighting positions on several hilltops that commanded good fields of fire over the approaches to the LZ. Williams joined her at the observation point, studying the terrain through his rifle scope. "Looks like they've been busy," he said grimly. "This whole area's been turned into a kill zone." Elena was thinking through the tactical problem, trying to identify routes that would avoid the obvious enemy positions while still allowing them to reach the extraction site within their time constraints. The direct approach was clearly impossible. They'd be moving through open ground under observation from multiple enemy positions, but the indirect routes would add significant distance and time to their movement, and they were already behind schedule. That's when Elena noticed something that made her reconsider their entire approach to the problem. The enemy positions were oriented to cover the obvious approaches from the north and west, the directions that American forces would logically use if they were moving directly from their original patrol route to the extraction site. But the positions were not as well situated to cover approaches from the east, where Elena and her squad were currently located. "Sergeant," Elena said, pointing out the pattern she'd observed, "look at how they've positioned their fighting positions. They're covering the direct routes, but they've left a gap in their coverage to the east." Williams studied the enemy positions more carefully, following Elena's analysis. "You're right, but that eastern approach would take us through some rough terrain, lots of dead ground where we could get channeled into another ambush."
Elena was already studying her map, identifying terrain features that would provide concealment during an eastern approach to the LZ. "Not if we stay on the high ground," she said. "Look, we can move along this ridgeline for about 2 kilometers, then drop down into this wadi system that leads directly to the extraction site. We'd be approaching from their blind side." It was a sound tactical plan, but it would require them to cover almost 4 kilometers of difficult terrain while carrying their wounded and maintaining operational security. Williams was doing the math, calculating time and distance against their extraction deadline. "It's going to be tight," he said finally, "but it's better than walking into a prepared kill zone." He looked at Elena with something that might have been admiration. "How the hell did you learn to read terrain like this?" Elena thought about her grandmother's stories of crossing the desert during the Depression, navigating by stars and landmarks through a country that was actively hostile to travelers. Those stories had seemed like ancient history when Elena was growing up, but now they felt directly relevant to her current situation. "My family's been finding ways around obstacles for a long time," Elena said simply. As the squad prepared to move along the ridgeline, Elena found herself thinking about the transformation that had taken place over the past few hours. She'd started the evening as Mouse, the weak link who needed protection and accommodation. Now she was making tactical decisions that could determine whether her squad mates lived or died. The responsibility was overwhelming, but it was also clarifying. More importantly, Elena was beginning to understand that strength came in different forms. Williams was strong in the conventional military sense, aggressive, decisive, physically imposing. But the situation they were facing required different capabilities. Careful observation, methodical planning, the ability to find unconventional solutions to complex problems. Those were strengths Elena had always possessed, but she'd never recognized them as tactically relevant until tonight. The movement along the ridgeline required constant vigilance and careful noise discipline. Elena led the way, using hand signals to communicate obstacles and direction changes. Behind her, Rodriguez was managing her concussion symptoms better, though Elena could see that the medic was fighting exhaustion with every step. Chen had found a way to secure his injured arm that allowed for more effective movement, though his face was tight with pain. Torres was pushing through her shrapnel wounds with characteristic determination, but Elena could see blood seeping through her bandages. Williams maintained security at the rear of their formation, his eyes constantly scanning for signs of pursuit or flanking attempts. So far, they'd encountered no direct enemy contact, but Elena could hear distant voices and vehicle sounds that suggested significant enemy activity in the valley below. 2 kilometers into their movement along the ridgeline, Elena spotted something that made her call an immediate halt. In the moonlight, she could see a small structure ahead, probably a shepherd's hut or hunting blind, that commanded excellent observation over their planned route. Worse, she could see the dull glow of what looked like a cigarette ember near the structure, suggesting active enemy presence. Elena signaled Williams forward and pointed out the potential threat. The sergeant studied the structure through his scope, confirming Elena's assessment. They were faced with another tactical decision: bypass the enemy position by deviating from their planned route, or attempt to neutralize the threat and continue along the optimal path. "How many?" Williams whispered. "Can't tell. At least one, maybe more." Elena was studying the terrain around the structure, looking for alternative routes that would keep them out of visual range. "We could go around to the south, but it would add another kilometer and take us through that open area we saw earlier." Williams was quiet for a moment, weighing their options. "How good are you with that rifle, Mouse?"
Elena felt her pulse quicken. Williams was asking if she could take a precision shot at an enemy position, something she'd trained for but never done in actual combat. The practical considerations were complex: range, wind, lighting conditions, the possibility of multiple targets. But the tactical implications were even more significant. A successful shot would clear their route and potentially prevent the enemy from reporting their movement. A missed shot would alert every hostile force in the area to their exact location. "I'm a decent shot," Elena said carefully, "but there might be multiple targets and we don't know their alert status. If I miss, or if there are others we can't see—" "Yeah, I know the risks." Williams studied the enemy position again. "What about your radio? Can you reach higher command from here?" Elena checked her equipment and tested her antenna orientation. The elevated position should give her good line-of-sight communications with the TOC, assuming her radio had survived the climb without damage. "I think so. What do you need?" "I want to know if they can give us real-time intelligence on enemy positions between here and the LZ. If we're going to make it through this, we need better information about what we're walking into." Elena established communications with the Tactical Operations Center, requesting updated intelligence on enemy activity in their area of operations. What she learned was both helpful and concerning. Higher Command had been monitoring enemy communications and movement for the past hour, and they'd identified at least 3 separate groups of hostile forces operating between Elena's squad and the extraction site. More importantly, the TOC had intelligence suggesting that the enemy was coordinating a deliberate effort to prevent American forces from reaching the extraction point. It wasn't just an opportunistic ambush, it was a planned operation designed to capture or kill isolated American personnel. "They're hunting us specifically," Elena reported to Williams after ending her radio contact. "Higher Command thinks they intercepted our original extraction timeline and have been positioning accordingly." Williams absorbed this information with characteristic calm, but Elena could see the calculation in his eyes. If the enemy was actively hunting them, every minute they spend in the field increased their risk of detection and engagement. But rushing toward the extraction site without proper reconnaissance would be equally dangerous. "All right," Williams said finally. "We need to move faster, but we also need to be smarter about it. Can your radio reach close air support from here?" Elena checked her communications parameters. "Maybe. Depends on what aircraft are in the area and what frequencies they're monitoring." "Try it. If we can get air support to suppress some of these enemy positions, it might give us a window to move." Elena spent several minutes attempting to establish contact with available close air support, cycling through different frequencies and call signs. Eventually, she managed to reach a pair of Apache attack helicopters that were operating in a nearby sector, though they were currently engaged with enemy forces approximately 15 kilometers to the north. "Negative on immediate close air support. They're committed to another engagement, but they might be available in 30 to 40 minutes. Williams considered this timeline against their extraction deadline and their current tactical situation. 40 minutes would put them dangerously close to their pickup window, but it might also provide the fire support they needed to break through the enemy cordon. "We'll keep moving and see what develops," Williams decided. "Stay on the radio and keep monitoring for available support, but we can't count on air cover to get us out of this." As they prepared to continue their movement along the ridgeline, Elena found herself thinking about the complexity of their situation. Every decision created new variables and new risks. The tactical environment was constantly changing as enemy forces repositioned and as friendly assets became available or committed elsewhere. Success would require not just physical endurance and marksmanship, but the ability to synthesize information from multiple sources and adapt to changing circumstances in real time. It was exactly the kind of challenge that Elena's methodical, analytical mind was designed to handle.
For the first time in her military career, she felt like her natural problem-solving abilities were perfectly matched to the tactical requirements of her situation. The question was whether those abilities would be enough to get her squad mates home alive. The enemy position at the shepherd's hut turned out to be the key to everything. As Elena studied the structure through her rifle scope, she began to notice details that transformed her understanding of their entire tactical situation. The cigarette ember Williams had spotted wasn't just a careless smoking habit. It was positioned precisely to provide a signal to other enemy forces. Every few minutes, the ember would move in a specific pattern. 2 short movements, pause. 1 long movement, pause. Repeat. "They're using that position as a communications relay," Elena whispered to Williams. "Look at the timing of those light signals. That's not random, it's coordinated." Williams observed the pattern for several cycles, his expression growing more serious as he recognized the implications. "If you're right, then taking out that position might disrupt their entire coordination network." Elena was already thinking through the tactical possibilities. Her communications training had included instruction on enemy signal procedures, and the pattern she was observing matched doctrinal examples of visual signaling techniques used by organized insurgent forces. More importantly, the position of the shepherd's hut suggested it was serving as a central node in a larger network of observation posts. "Sergeant, what if we don't take them out?" Elena suggested. "What if we use their communications network against them?" Williams looked at her with interest. "What do you mean?" Elena pointed to the enemy position and explained her thinking. "If that's a signal relay, then they're coordinating movement based on information from multiple observation posts. If we can intercept their signals, or better yet, if we can feed them false information, we might be able to create gaps in their coverage that we can exploit." It was an unconventional approach requiring technical skills that most infantry soldiers didn't possess, but Elena's background in electronics and communications gave her capabilities that could be tactically relevant in ways she'd never anticipated. More importantly, it offered a solution that might allow them to reach the extraction site without direct confrontation with superior enemy forces. Williams was quiet for a long moment, evaluating the risks and benefits of Elena's proposal. "You really think you can intercept their communications?" "I can try. My radio equipment includes frequency scanning capabilities that might let me identify their operating parameters. If they're using simple radio networks in addition to visual signals, I might be able to monitor their transmissions and figure out their coordination protocols." It was a complex technical challenge with significant tactical implications. If Elena was successful, they might gain real-time intelligence on enemy positions and movements. If she was unsuccessful, they'd waste valuable time and potentially expose their position to enemy detection. Rodriguez, who'd been listening to their conversation despite her compression, offered an unexpected perspective. "Elena's right about the signaling pattern. I've seen similar techniques during cultural training. Local security forces use visual signals when they can't rely on radio communications." Torres nodded agreement from her position against a nearby rock. "And if they're coordinating multiple positions, they probably have a standardized protocol for reporting contact and movement. Elena might be able to predict their responses based on the signals they're sending."
Elena felt a surge of confidence as her squad mates supported her analysis. For the first time in her military career, her technical expertise was being recognized as tactically valuable rather than academically interesting. More importantly, her squad mates were beginning to see her as a source of solutions rather than problems. Elena began configuring her radio equipment for frequency scanning, adjusting antenna orientation and power settings to optimize signal reception. The process required careful attention to detail and patient observation, skills that Elena had developed through years of electronics work, but it never applied in a combat environment. Within 15 minutes, Elena had identified 3 separate radio frequencies that appeared to be carrying enemy communications. The transmissions were brief and mostly coded, but she could hear enough to confirm that they were coordinating movement between multiple positions. More importantly, she could hear the tactical call signs that corresponded to different geographic areas, allowing her to begin mapping the enemy's organizational structure. "I've got them," Elena reported to Williams. "At least 3 separate elements, probably more. They're using tactical call signs based on terrain features, rock house, 3 trees, high point, and they're reporting movement timelines that suggest they're repositioning to intercept us at the extraction site." Williams studied Elena's hastily drawn map showing the enemy positions she'd identified through signal analysis. "Can you tell where they think we are?" Elena listened to several more transmissions, noting references to their original patrol route and the valley where they'd encountered the first ambush. "They think we're still moving through the valley system. They didn't know we climbed out and got onto the high ground." This intelligence revelation changed everything. If the enemy forces were positioning themselves based on incorrect assumptions about the American squad's location and route, then Elena's unconventional approach to the extraction site might actually work. More importantly, they had an opportunity to exploit the enemy's misperception by timing their movement to avoid the repositioning forces. "How long do we have before they figure out they're wrong?" Williams asked. Elena considered the tactical timeline and the enemy's most likely courses of action. "Depends on when they expect contact with us in the valley. If we stay quiet and avoid detection for another hour, they might start repositioning their forces to expand their search area. That could open up the approach routes to the LZ." Williams made the decision with characteristic military efficiency. "We wait. 1 hour, then we move fast and quiet toward the extraction site. Rodriguez, how are you holding up?" The medic tested her balance and coordination, swaying slightly but managing to remain upright. "I can make it. The dizziness is getting better and I've still got most of my gear." She gestured toward her medical kit, which she had been carrying despite her injuries. "I might need help with some of the more technical movements, but I'm functional." Chen flexed his injured shoulder, wincing at the pain but demonstrating improved range of motion. "My arm's still fucked, but I can carry my weapon and move with the squad. Just don't ask me to do any precision shooting." Torres was the most seriously injured, with shrapnel wounds that had been bleeding slowly throughout their movement. But she was also the most experienced member of their squad, and her tactical judgment had been invaluable throughout the evening. "I'm good for whatever distance we need to cover. Let's just get it done." Elena felt a profound sense of responsibility as she looked at her wounded squad mates. These people were trusting her analysis and her planning with their lives. The technical skills that had made her feel like an outsider during training were now the foundation for tactical decisions that could determine whether they all made it home. During the hour they waited for enemy forces to reposition, Elena continued monitoring enemy communications while maintaining contact with higher command. The intelligence picture became clearer as she listened to more transmissions and correlated them with movement reports from aerial surveillance assets. The enemy force was larger and better organized than anyone had initially estimated. Elena identified at least 8 separate elements, probably company strength overall, that were coordinating their operations through
positioned observation posts on P terrain features, established mobile reaction forces that could respond to contact within minutes, and were using motorcycle-mounted messengers to maintain communications when radio traffic needed to be minimized. More concerning, Elena realized that the enemy was specifically hunting for American communications personnel. Several transmissions included references to capturing radio equipment and interrogating personnel with technical knowledge. They weren't just trying to prevent the squad from reaching extraction. They were actively seeking to capture Elena and her equipment for intelligence purposes. "They know about our communications capabilities," Elena reported to Williams. "They're specifically looking for radio operators. They want to capture equipment and personnel for intelligence collection." Williams absorbed this information with visible concern. Elena's radio pack and technical knowledge made her a high-value target, but they also made her essential for coordinating their extraction and maintaining contact with friendly forces. Protecting Elena while utilizing her capabilities would require careful tactical planning. "Can you configure your radio to deny them intelligence if we get compromised?" Williams asked. Elena nodded, showing him the destruction procedures she'd been trained to execute in emergency situations.
I can wipe the encryption keys and physically destroy the critical components in about 30 seconds. But once I do that, we lose all communications with higher command. It was another tactical trade-off with significant implications. Maintaining communications gave them access to intelligence updates and coordination with extraction assets, but it also made Elena a priority target for enemy forces. Destroying the radio would eliminate that vulnerability, but would also isolate them completely during the final approach to the extraction site. Williams made the decision to maintain communications as long as possible, while preparing for rapid destruction if capture seemed imminent. Elena configured her equipment accordingly, pre-positioning the components that would need to be destroyed and rehearsing the procedures until she could execute them smoothly, even under stress. As their planned wait time neared completion, Elena conducted one final assessment of enemy positions and movement patterns. The intelligence she'd gathered suggested that enemy forces had indeed repositioned based on their assumption that the American squad was still moving through the valley system. Several observation posts had been abandoned or reduced in strength as personnel moved to reinforce positions along the valley routes. More importantly, Elena had identified a specific window of opportunity. The enemy's repositioning would create a gap in their coverage between 0200 and 0230 hours, approximately 40 minutes after the squad began their final movement toward the extraction site. If they could reach the area during that window, they might be able to approach the LZ without encountering prepared defensive positions. "We need to move now," Elena told Williams, showing him the intelligence summary she'd compiled. "We've got maybe a 30-minute window before they figure out their mistake and start repositioning again." Williams studied Elena's analysis and made the decision to trust her judgment completely. "All right, Vasquez, your plan, your route, your timeline. Get us to that LZ." Elena felt the weight of command responsibility settle across her shoulders like a physical burden. She was now effectively leading the squad, making tactical decisions that would determine their survival. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, the culmination of everything she'd learned during 3 years of military training applied in a situation where theoretical knowledge had immediate life-or-death consequences. Rodriguez was managing her concussion symptoms better as adrenaline and necessity overcame her physical limitations. Chen had found ways to compensate for his injured shoulder, using his rifle as a walking stick during difficult terrain and maintaining good spacing within the formation. Torres pushed through her shrapnel wounds with characteristic determination, her experience showing in the way she anticipated terrain challenges and positioned herself to provide security for the rest of the squad. Williams had transitioned from squad leader to tactical advisor, supporting Elena's decisions while maintaining overall responsibility for their mission's success. Elena could see that this transition was difficult for him. His training and experience emphasized aggressive leadership and direct action, but he was adapting to their situation with professional flexibility, recognizing that Elena's skills were better suited to their current tactical requirements. 2 kilometers into their movement, Elena spotted something that confirmed her analysis of enemy operations. In a small valley below their position, she could see the distinctive heat signatures of motorcycle engines through her night vision equipment. The vehicles were positioned along the route that would have been their most direct approach to the extraction site, confirming that enemy forces were indeed concentrated along the obvious routes. "Count 6 motorcycles, maybe 12 personnel," Elena reported to Williams. "They're positioned exactly where my intelligence suggested they'd be, covering the direct approaches to the LZ." Williams observed the enemy position through his own night vision scope. "Good call on the alternate route. If we'd gone direct, we'd have walked right into them." Elena felt a surge of confidence as her tactical predictions proved accurate. Her analysis of enemy communications and movement patterns was allowing them to avoid contact while maintaining progress toward their objective. More importantly, her squad mates were beginning to see her as a tactical leader rather than a technical specialist who needed protection. The final approach to the extraction site required careful coordination between Elena's route planning and Williams's security procedures. Elena identified covered approaches that would allow them to reach the LZ without exposure to enemy observation, while Williams coordinated their movement timing with higher command to ensure that extraction assets would be available when they arrived. As they crested the final ridgeline overlooking the extraction site, Elena felt a complex mixture of relief and apprehension. The LZ was visible below them, marked by the infrared beacons that would guide their extraction helicopter to the correct location. But Elena could also see evidence of recent enemy activity, tire tracks, fighting positions, and communications equipment that suggested the area had been under hostile surveillance. LZ looks clear, but it's been compromised recently, Elena reported to Williams. They know about our extraction site, but they're not currently occupying it. Williams studied the area through his scope, confirming Elena's assessment. Probably pulled back to avoid being targeted by our air assets. The question is whether they're planning to interfere with the extraction or just gathering intelligence. Elena was already thinking through the tactical implications. If enemy forces were monitoring the extraction site, they would probably attempt to engage the helicopter during landing or takeoff, the most vulnerable phases of the extraction operation. But they might also be planning to capture American personnel for intelligence purposes, which would require different tactics and positioning. We need to get down there and establish security before the bird arrives, but we also need to be ready for contact during the extraction. Williams nodded and began coordinating their final approach with the squad. Elena felt a profound sense of accomplishment as she realized how much her role had evolved throughout the evening. She'd started as Mouse, the weak link who needed protection. Now she was making tactical decisions and providing leadership that could determine whether they all made it home alive. The transformation wasn't just about technical skills or tactical knowledge. It was about recognizing that strength came in different forms and that her particular combination of analytical thinking, technical expertise, and careful observation were exactly what their situation required.
As they prepared for the final movement to the extraction site, Elena realized that she'd never again see herself as inadequate or unprepared for military service. She'd found her place in the complex ecosystem of modern warfare, not as someone who tried to mimic conventional military strengths, but as someone who brought unique capabilities that were valuable in their own right. The radio crash. This is the extraordinary true-to-life story of Elena Vasquez, a small-statured communications specialist who transformed from being seen as the weak link in her squad to becoming a pioneering general who revolutionized military training and leadership philosophy. It's a powerful narrative about discovering that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the greatest victories come not from conforming to expectations, but from embracing what makes you unique. Elena's journey begins during a nighttime extraction mission in hostile territory. Known by the dismissive nickname Mouse due to her small frame, Elena was the communications specialist for a 5-person squad that had completed a reconnaissance mission and needed extraction. What should have been a routine helicopter pickup became a test of survival when enemy forces destroyed the extraction bridge and began hunting the scattered American soldiers. While her squad leader, Sergeant Williams, initially planned conventional escape routes, Elena's analytical mind and technical expertise led her to propose an unconventional path through difficult terrain that larger soldiers would struggle to navigate. Her careful study of topographical maps, combined with her electronics background that helped her understand enemy communication patterns, revealed tactical advantages that aggressive action alone couldn't achieve. As the squad moved through 5 miles of hostile territory, Elena's small size, previously seen as a liability, became a decisive advantage. She could move through terrain features that would have been impossible for larger personnel, remain undetected where others might be spotted, and think through complex tactical problems under extreme pressure.
The mission's climax came when Elena single-handedly neutralized an enemy machine gun position that was preventing their helicopter extraction. Using grenades with precise timing and positioning that leveraged her analytical approach to tactical problems, she eliminated the threat and saved her entire squad. This moment marked her transformation from Mouse, the soldier who needed protection, to the person whose tactical decisions and individual actions ensured everyone's survival. Sergeant Williams, who had initially used her nickname dismissively, began calling her by her proper name with genuine respect. Her squadmates, who had sustained various injuries throughout the mission, recognized that Elena's unconventional approach had been the key to their successful extraction. More importantly, Elena herself realized that her analytical thinking and technical expertise weren't weaknesses to overcome. They were strengths that could be decisive under the right circumstances. Elena's exceptional performance during the extraction mission caught the attention of senior officers, leading to specialized training opportunities and rapid promotion. She was recognized not for overcoming her perceived limitations, but for bringing unique capabilities that enhanced overall military effectiveness. As she advanced through the ranks, from specialist to lieutenant colonel, then captain, lieutenant colonel, and eventually major general, Elena consistently applied the same analytical approach that had saved her squad. She led specialized reconnaissance units, developed innovative training protocols, and taught advanced courses on tactical decision-making and adaptive leadership. Her work began influencing military doctrine, showing that modern warfare required soldiers who could think analytically and adapt to changing circumstances, not just personnel who could execute conventional procedures. Elena's small unit became a model for integrating diverse capabilities, and her training methods spread throughout the Army. Elena's most significant contribution was transforming how the military understood and developed leadership capabilities. Traditional military culture had emphasized physical strength and aggressive confidence, but Elena proved that analytical thinking and careful observation could be equally valuable. Her training programs taught soldiers to recognize when tactical situations required unconventional approaches. As a senior instructor at the Army's Command and General Staff College, Elena developed case studies showing how tactical adaptability and individual initiative could succeed where conventional methods failed. Her students, majors and lieutenant colonels being prepared for command positions, learned to balance disciplined adherence to proven procedures with the flexibility to adapt when circumstances required innovative thinking. Elena's influence extended beyond individual training to institutional change. She established the principle that effective military operations required diverse capabilities and different approaches to problem solving. Success depended not on forcing everyone to meet the same conventional standards, but on recognizing and utilizing the unique strengths that different people brought to complex challenges. Throughout her 20-year career, Elena continued mentoring soldiers who reminded her of her younger self, technically proficient, analytically minded individuals who struggled with conventional expectations about military leadership. She helped them understand that their analytical capabilities weren't limitations, but strengths that could be decisive under the right conditions. Her work culminated in the establishment of the Vasquez Center for Adaptive Leadership at the Army's Command and General Staff College. This center continues developing approaches to military education that prepare leaders for complex tactical environments requiring innovative thinking and individual initiative. Elena's book, Adaptive Leadership in Complex Environments, became required reading in military education programs worldwide. The book's central thesis demonstrated that modern military operations required leaders who could combine analytical thinking with practical problem solving, adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining essential military discipline and effectiveness. Elena's story illustrates a profound truth about strength and capability that extends far beyond military service. Her grandmother's wisdom, strength is carrying what needs to be carried when it needs to be carried, became the foundation for understanding that different situations require different types of strength. The narrative shows how Elena's initial struggles with physical training and conventional military expectations masked capabilities that would prove invaluable under actual operational conditions. Her small size, careful analytical approach, and methodical problem-solving style weren't obstacles to overcome, but tactical advantages waiting for the right circumstances. Her journey demonstrates that organizations, whether military units, businesses, or any group working toward common goals, achieve their greatest success when they recognize and utilize the full range of human capabilities, rather than trying to force everyone into the same template. The story concludes with Elena's retirement as a major general, but her influence continues through the thousands of soldiers whose careers were enhanced by training programs recognizing diverse capabilities as essential elements of military effectiveness. The young
communications specialist who once struggled to find her place in military culture had become a senior general whose ideas influenced military education and training worldwide. Elena's final observation, that strength comes in many forms, and effective organizations find ways to recognize and utilize all of those forms, represents a fundamental shift in how we understand leadership and capability. Her legacy lives on through continuing evolution in military culture and the soldiers who will face future challenges using principles she helped establish. Elena Vasquez's transformation from mouse to major general proves that our perceived weaknesses might actually be our greatest strengths, waiting for the right opportunity to emerge. Her story reminds us that analytical thinking, careful observation, and adaptive problem-solving can be just as powerful as conventional displays of strength and leadership. Sometimes the person who thinks carefully about problems and finds solutions others might not see becomes exactly what the situation requires. Elena's journey shows that true strength often means being willing to carry what needs to be carried, when it needs to be carried, regardless of what others think you should be able to do. Thank you for taking this journey through Elena Vasquez's remarkable transformation from overlooked soldier to pioneering general. Her story demonstrates that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes our greatest challenges help us discover capabilities we never knew we possessed. If you enjoyed this story of courage, adaptation, and redefining what it means to be strong, please subscribe to hear more inspiring narratives about people who discovered that their differences weren't limitations to overcome, but advantages waiting for the right moment to shine. Subscribe now and join us for more stories that challenge conventional thinking and celebrate the diverse ways humans can excel under pressure. Hit that subscribe button to never miss stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things by embracing what makes them unique. Your subscription helps us continue sharing narratives that inspire, educate, and remind us that strength truly comes in many different forms.